Welcome to Romance Unzipped, your happily ever after book club. I'm Holly.
And I'm Annie. We read, write, and obsess about all things romance.
Let's dive in.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Holly.
Hey, I'm Annie.
We are Romance Unzipped.
We are your happily ever after book clubbing podcast. We're book clubbing the world's greatest genre.
And what about this week? What did we read? What are we reviewing?
So this week we read Lola and the Millionaires by Kathryn Moon. It is an omegaverse romance, which this was my first. And Holly, tell us about the tropes.
Well, aside from omegaverse, because there are so many characters involved, there's just a little bit of age gap, there's a little slow burn, there's a little bit of a boss employee, and they're all pretty wealthy. I don't know if I'd go so far as to call it a billionaire romance, but it's got some of those same ideals, fun things to read about. And then she gets a found family in this pack.
Yeah. And so it's contemporary and it is not a human world, but it is similarly structured to a human world. So it's not
they seem
in the
like
future.
humans. They just have a slightly different biology.
Yeah. So they're human. And in the beginning, Kathryn Moon, the author, says a note on this omegaverse. There are no shifters in this book, which perhaps is sometimes for omegaverses. These alphas, betas, and omegas are not shifters. This is an alternate universe to ours with an alternate human biology that includes animalistic traits adapted to a romance premise. There are fancy penises, mating instincts, pheromones, and bonding marks, as well as a slight hierarchical social construct. And I appreciated that intro because
Let
I'm
you
not
know what to
familiar.
expect.
I knew I was ready for some fancy gift boxes myself. So our main character is Lola, and then she has a growing pack of suitors who are all part of the shared alpha pack, part of a pack.
Yeah, they're all part of a pack. She first meets Leo. He's a beta, and Lola is a beta. And then they have one omega in their pack who is Rake, and she meets him pretty soon thereafter. And she's dating the two of them for most of the book, but they have four alphas in their pack that slowly get brought into the fold.
Everyone loves Lola.
And the book is first person. It's not a dual point of view. It's like a six point of view, but she gets the vast majority. Each of the other characters get one or two chapters. So it's just enough to get to know them a little better and understand things from their perspective, but it's mostly Lola's book.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like if you had a pack of chicken nuggets and you got all the sauces.
Ooh.
So you're like, I want honey mustard. Now I'm going to get a little barbecue perspective. Well, I'm just going to go basic ketchup. And
Okay, that's great. We should write to Kathryn Moon and tell her she should include that in her intro.
she's like, I'm vegan. So
You can do this with those meat alternatives as well.
yeah, chicken. So fair warning, there is a TBD or a TBC, a to be continued. And also there's some significant trigger warnings for this book. So the premise is her recovering from a very traumatic, abusive, ongoing
She had a
sucky situation.
very bad relationship, and it was with two alphas. So she's now completely afraid of all alphas. She definitely has signs of PTSD. It's not described in those words, but the way her behavior comes
Oh
across.
yeah, she has total meltdowns, like complete fall apart. So if that is triggering to you, we're not going to talk about it heavily in this episode, but just know
not be
that
fun.
maybe this might not be the book for you. Yeah. But
And about that to be continued, it's definitely a happily ever after. They end all with each other, but
yes, protecting her.
yes, they're protecting her. She's not actually part of their pack yet, but they want her in the pack and she wants to be in the pack. She's just not far enough along in her healing journey from this previous trauma to be a part of it. And one of the characters who we never really meet on the page, it's just through flashbacks, but one of the men that was tormenting her has broken into her apartment, vandalized it, and leaving these scary messages. And that's kind of when it ends. So there's a little bit of, oh, something's up in the air, but it's not having to do with a breakup or any kind of happily ever
Right.
after messing up. I mean, they're strong in their bond.
Yeah, that's usually the cliffhanger, right? Is-
Exactly. So I don't even consider it a cliffhanger so much as just a longer story waiting to happen. I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
yeah. I usually it's like an emotional cliffhanger if where you're like, what, they just broke
no,
up. Oh
they
my
don't
gosh,
love
he
each
found her
other.
and he thinks she's sleeping with his brother, but he's not. And da da da. So they're together, and she's not alone in this moment where she's kind of ultimately confronted with the like the truth that this bad guy is coming back and he's taunting her, because they're all with her, like physically with her in that moment. Like one of them, she calls one and they all come racing, and we love that. That's why we need a pack.
Yes, they're all powerful, all wealthy and powerful in other ways. They seem to be like the heads of their industries, but they're also so like just squishy
Genteel.
and loving, and they can't even. They're almost afraid of Lola because they don't want to scare her or make her uncomfortable, so they don't quite know how to act. So they bend over backwards to make her feel comfortable.
Yeah, and that just one last trope that is major is the hurt comfort. So she is hurt and they want to comfort her. So the
Yes.
story is her healing journey, essentially her feeling safe, coming out of this place of super isolation. And so that sounds highly depressing, and of course it is, but also it's really fun and bubbly too. So it is heartbreaking, and she has suffered this intense, terrible experience, and she's kind of reconciling like how to be in the world again. And the world she's entering into is super safe and sparkly
Amazing.
and glamorous. So
So what would you say the spice level of this book is?
that is a good question. There's moments of spice, but then a lot of it feels more like the emotional navigation between the people. So I would say it's a 4 with the things that you see. But then I don't know. What are your thoughts?
At first I was thinking of 4, and then I got to the last maybe third of the book, and I was thinking of 5.
You're like, okay,
Okay, this has really ventured into something quite different. Once they all get together, and there's just a whole lot of body parts.
Fancy.
Yes, and they're fancy. But it was good. It was not a smut story. It was a
Yeah.
healing, emotional story that had a lot of sex because there were 7 of them.
Yeah. This was my first Kathryn Moon book, and Holly had found it, I think through Reddit. Is that right?
Yeah, this was talked about quite a bit.
The people love Kathryn Moon. I had seen her name pop up so many times, or reading reviews on other platforms, and someone would say, oh, da da da, kind of reminded me of Kathryn Moon. And then all the following comments would be like, I love her, obsessed, da da
Heart
da.
emojis.
Heart emojis. So we read a bit about her, and most of her work is in the magical land, like witches and paranormal, etc. And yeah, her writing is really fun. So it was warm and interesting, not overly flowery, but it felt really descriptive, like I was in this world. And I really liked how she peppered in pieces of the story. So as we meet Lola, we don't have this big info dump of here's everything that happened and here's where she is. It's just these little bits and pieces that pepper through. And it was, Holly always says this, where it like makes her feel smart if she gets to pick up clues and put them together. And I was like, oh, I felt so clever. I'm definitely
figured it out.
I'm getting it.
Yeah, aside from nice writing like you described, specifically the way she introduced us to Lola's backstory was through nightmares. So Lola would have a nightmare and then wake up sweating. And from there, we could see her response, see what her trauma was, and also see her growth throughout the book when her nightmares were not as big of a disruption. But when that would happen, usually we'd get just like a slightly longer version of the same scary scene, or maybe a new element of this memory that she had. And so that's how it was introduced. And it didn't feel like an exposition or like, let me just dump my backstory, because the nightmares themselves really did serve a purpose in her journey. So it worked. And all the nightmares were in italics, and usually at the beginning of chapters. So you could tell that it was not happening currently. And it really flowed well.
It did. And also it came as like intrusive thoughts. So if she's working or she's doing something and she would have this intrusive thought and it would be in italics, but it really made sense in the broader scope, because you would see this voice that was kind of trying to tear her down. Either it was a memory or it was this like trauma voice that was a version of it. Lola's reaction, as Kathryn Moon wrote them, were progressively like healing through the book as far as how she responded to these flashbacks or intrusive thoughts or kind of voices. And so at first she's just completely gutted by them. And then slowly she kind of gets a little bit more strength and perspective or tools to move through it. And of course, love.
Yes. I was really proud of Lola throughout the book because, like you said, she never got rid of that terribly cruel, mean inner voice that would try to convince her that she was worthless or she was no good, or but she would quiet it. She'd have the thought and she'd even stop at mid-sentence and say, no, I'm not going to think about that right now, or even have a rational thought that would like was the opposite of the terrible thing she was telling herself. So she was learning to fight back against that voice. It's not that it totally went away. And I just thought, oh, you go, girl.
What did you think, Holly, about her writing?
It was beautiful. I was really entertained. I read a little interview from her, and she had said, some readers say that my writing is lyrical, and I guess if run-on sentences are lyrical, that's true. And I didn't find her to have too many run-on sentences, but she wasn't interested in just showing everything as a literal list of facts. So it was immersive.
It was immersive. And when to that end, her writing about, Lola works in the fashion world and she is a beauty makeup artist and kind of beauty content creator. And so as she's shifting out of this year of hibernation, basically, or I guess hiding, 'cause she's just been scared is a better way to put it. Her cousin gets her a job at the fashion magazine, which is interesting, just side note, because isn't that what they call the different hierarchical is the designations?
They call them
So
designations. I noticed that too.
But it's funny because I speak Spanish, and so I kept reading it as a Spanish word, like designate. And then I was like, oh wait, this is designate. This is not a conjugated verb. But I thought it was odd because in some contexts it was almost like the fact that they had designations was a little bit of a negative. So it was odd that the magazine was named that. I don't know. But anyway, so it was her dream job. It was like the magazine. And I got the idea that it was a little bit-ish Vogue. There was elements of worlds that I recognized here, but the way that Kathryn Moon wrote about this fashion world was really fun. So
it was effervescent.
And I love fashion. And so I felt transported into this world and part of, like, you feel like an insider. And the way she describes it, like, as you said, isn't just this kind of like, I'm a fashion and beauty editor and I make this neat thing, but it was just like the joy and the passion. And then we were reading Kathryn Moon's bio, and she had a short stint in trying to have a fashion career. And I was like, oh, she loves fashion. It all lines up.
Yeah. So you know how last week it was a book about baseball and you were saying like, oh, this is my wheelhouse?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you're right.
So this week is the opposite, and this is definitely leaning more into your interest. And
this is Annie's color wheelhouse.
Let me describe to you how unfamiliar I am with this world. So Rake, the Omega in this story, he's like a model. I found out.
Yeah.
He's super famous. He's very charismatic. Part of that is because he's an Omega. But it was 25% of the way through the book before they used Lola used the word model, and I was like, oh, that's what it's called, because this is what I wrote in my notes as I was describing what each character is. I said Rake, Omega, super fashion, big deal man. I just couldn't figure out exactly how he was related to all of this, but
they love to take pictures of him and pose him.
So this must be what you feel like reading about baseball.
The stick ball.
But there was a lot of talk about fashion. I didn't feel alienated by it, but I was a little bit confused at times. She was talking about
super fashion, big deal man. This was my first omegaverse. And Holly, for you too, right? Mm-hmm. Which is kind of amazing because I read a lot of romance novels. So I don't know how I missed this entire subgenre, but there is a whole ripe world and very ardent readers. So we were talking about the tropes, and I was wondering, is it a reverse harem? And no, they are different animals, or one is an animal.
One's usually more human, one leans more paranormal and shifter.
Yeah, and so the as I understand it, the difference is one is really based on this kind of biological impulse of mating. Holly, you can
That's
expound on this.
I don't know why you would think
Nailed
I
it.
could. If okay, so I'm going to fall into this trap where when I have small exposure to something, I just assume every single thing about that event translates to the larger picture.
Yes, great idea.
So who knows if we are making assumptions, but it seemed pretty clear from this book that you've got alphas and they have this biological drive to find and mate with an omega,
And protect
protect
and
the omega,
cherish
and
and
then
spoil
similarly that the omega is drawn to the alphas, and betas
needs.
didn't really seem to fit in. I mean, there are now two betas in this pack of seven at the end of this book, Lola and the Millionaires, but it was hard to figure out from the biological need standpoint where they fall in. And in fact, Lola had a lot of insecurity throughout the whole book of feeling like she was just superfluous and unnecessary. And then the
Yeah,
alphas would reassure her and say, "What are you talking about? Like, this has nothing to do with whether you're a beta or I'm an alpha. We just love you or we just really like you."
as I gather, this book is a bit unique in that it stars a beta because usually it is the push pull of the alpha and the omega and like the alpha pack. But every people were saying, people, reviewers, that they liked that it was a beta who was the protagonist. So I think they're kind of the like second cousins no one talks about, but Lola got to shine in this
Good for
story.
you, Lola.
Get it, Lola.
And there was
And
one other beta in their group. This guy Leo. She's the first one of the pack that she met, and he was a great
he was
addition to his pack, and everybody loved him, and he was like the glue that held them together.
Yeah, it was really interesting. So it was an all male pack in prior to Lola. She hasn't joined it, but I'm going to go ahead and take a stab that book two
Seems likely.
seems likely.
So Lola had a lot of
So
insecurity about being a beta, partially because of the type of abuse that the two alphas that she was with before she went into this depressive episode and she got PTSD and she met this pack. It's what she's experiencing in her nightmares. They were very cruel to her and would say
they were
things
predatory,
very predatory and talk about the way that, oh, you don't deserve this and we're an alpha and you're just we
trash.
should do whatever we want to you and you're trash. So, and she internalized a lot of that. But also, I feel like the way society's set up, it's not that much of a reach for her to feel that way. But it sounds like growing up, she just kept hoping she was going to develop into an omega. And Rake had said his perfume came in and he started becoming an omega, I think, when he was 15 years old. But she was in her early 20s when her best friend, Baby, became an omega and got her perfume in. So that's something that Lola had always been hoping for. And it seemed to me kind of like an innate quality, like your height, where most kids will develop that in high school, but some people, they get a growth spurt later on, like after they graduate high school. And she was hoping she was one of those outliers.
Yeah, so the scent is kind of the predominant through line, and I would imagine probably in the omegaverse world that is the key, but that perfume is unique to the omega and it is their like magical scent that draws people to them. But everyone has a really specific scent that's like an identifier, and Lola can immediately tell if someone's an alpha or not. I mean, anyone can by the way that they smell. Same for her being a beta, same for someone else being an omega, but I think omegas are the only ones that they call it a perfume.
I think so too. You know how in romance novels, we are all kind of told, like, oh, make sure you show, don't tell, and let all the five senses be a part of the reader experience? So there's this trend in all romance novels to write about smells. And I think we've all read about sandalwood a whole bunch of times.
Yes,
It
there
shows
is a
up a
lot of
lot.
sandalwood.
There's so much of an emphasis on talking about the way people smell, but usually it really falls into either like sandalwood, pine, or maybe vanilla. Like there's not a whole lot else. Whereas this book, it was so refreshing because there was a ton of talk about scents. That's how she would describe every character she met before she talked about what they look
Yeah.
like or really anything about them.
And it was how the scent made her feel too. So it was like the description of the smell, but then what the impact it had on her body and her mental state.
Yeah, they were intoxicating and would put her in a certain state. She described one person's smell as it was an armchair that I just wanted to lay down and daydream the day away. But then there were other things like tangible things like jasmine or honey or champagne. So it was fun to try to imagine those smells. I don't do a very good job of imagining what things smell like, but I think I had a better shot in this book than in most.
Yeah, and Holly and I are co-writing a book. That's what prompted us to start making this podcast because we just were consuming an ungodly number of romance novels, and our
Let's add one
spouses
more
were
to the
tired
pile.
of hearing about them. So we thought we'd share with you guys. And we're writing our romance novel, it's a contemporary romance set in San Francisco called Faded, a fake love story, and it is not a paranormal romance, which given the name you would think, but that's just the name of the dating app. But anyways, we were trying to think of Caleb, who's our main character. How do we describe how he smells? Because even if we're not going to say it's like a, you know, a boat tossed about in a summer squall on the ocean side, but we did want to be able to have some descriptor.
Something.
And so there's this store, a scent store in San Francisco called Ministry of Scent, and it is all colognes and perfumes and smells. And so we went in there, and
We had a little field
it was
trip.
a lot.
It was a lot. They had it looked like Parmesan shakers at like mom and pop pizza restaurants, but filled with coffee,
Yeah,
like ground up coffee. And
clear your nose.
yeah, you were supposed to, between smelling each scent, then grab this like jar of coffee and like take a big huff of it, and that's the thing that like clears your nose palate. There's probably a better
Yeah.
word for that.
Nose smelling.
Olfactory senses. I don't know.
Super fancy fashion man.
Yeah, big deal, man.
Big deal, man. But the funny thing is, I think after all that, we may have ended up with a little bit of sandalwood in there.
It's in all the colognes.
It smells good, guys.
It does. It does. It really does. And you know what surprised me? What continued to smell good when we would find it in different or colognes was tobacco.
Yeah, oh, totally. I know. And
Yeah.
that's just like, oh, but it does smell, it adds that like kind of like deep masculine kind of grounding scent. So that's an aside. Kathryn Moon does a great job with the scents. And throughout the book, they do stuff to her. Like it's a biological response. I guess is at the beginning, she uses the word pheromones. So it's tied in with her physical response to what they're putting out there.
And some
Like
of when the alphas are just so careful to not scare her or re-traumatize her, they're all aware that they just give off these pheromones. So they try to back up. There's this scene where she kind of loses her composure because she gets in a elevator with four alphas and she doesn't know them, and the smell is like closing in on her. So it's unpleasant for her to have such a strong smell until towards the end when she starts to fall in love with them, and then she likes it a lot.
The pack was fun because it is a little bit of the bouquet, the wild garden bouquet of all the romance novel archetype heroes. So, like you said, there's the age gap, there's the protector who's like the security specialist, there's the designer, homemade, like home creator, kind of nest maker, there's the businessman, there's the glamour, literal fuckboy, who falls for her. There's the Leo's kind of the like,
He seems more grounded, but he's also a really well-connected and successful real estate guy.
yeah. And he, to me, kind of felt like the most traditional alpha personality, even though he wasn't an alpha. So it was, you get a little bit of everybody as far as
Lola got a
characters.
little bit of everybody.
Lola got a little bit of
So
everybody.
one of the guys in this pack, the oldest one, Matthew, he did not have a sexual relationship with their Omega. And even
Yeah.
Lola was confused by that. So he was a part of the pack and he loved all of them. And I don't know if he had a sexual relationship with any of them, but for most of the book, he had a girlfriend that was completely separate from the pack.
Yeah. There's one part where Cyrus, another one, kind of calls him out on just like hound dogging Lola with his eyes, and he thinks no one notices, but he's just all heart eyes about her. And Cyrus teases him, and then like they kiss, you know.
Okay.
But there's no, the other people, the author makes a point of kind of sharing what their connection is. But yeah, he's kind of just part of. But it was also a unique pack because it was an quote open
Right. They make that clear in the book.
septagon.
That's yes. They make it clear that this pack is unusual because they allow dating outside of the pack, and they didn't seem jealous of each other at all as long as they could make time for everyone. They were a remarkably mature group of men.
And very, yes, all fashionable, all very cultured, wonderful manners, incredible restraint for a pack of animalistic alphas.
When we would
Highly,
have quick chapters from each of their point of view, they were all absolutely bonkers for Lola and wanted to get with her. And it wasn't just that they liked her, but their alpha animal side of them
take
was
care of her.
calling to them, and it was
She
almost like a
needs
need.
me to protect her.
But they always managed to button it up, and they would say things like, "Oh, I had to take my hand and hold on to my hand with my other hand, so I wouldn't be tempted to, wrap it around her waist."
Yeah, comfort her, not like throw her against the wall and bone her, but like
Right.
she might not be comfortable with me petting her hair. I'm like,
Is that what
so
we're
yeah,
doing?
if you want that like ravage, like claws out, teeth out type of animalistic primal
Yeah,
sex, this is
that's not
not.
here. Although there is a whole scene where Rake, the Omega, goes into heat. And
Yeah,
in that scene,
which is I think in across the Omegaverse, that's the key, right? It's like they go into heat and it's essentially like biological breeding, get busy. And so then the
yes,
alphas are like, must get the cum in the Omega.
yes. He was just a bundle of raw need
Yeah.
during that time. All of his pack mates would ravish him as much as they could until they had to like tap out and say mercy, and then more would.
Is that why they need a pack?
Oh, maybe because
You got to
one alpha
satisfy
couldn't
this.
possibly satisfy this Omega. And during
Wow.
that time, the heat is traditionally just for the pack, and Lola wasn't there, but Rake was just like begging and whining for her, and so she showed up in the middle. And they had said that finally, when she started just going to town on him, that she broke his heat, and so it was almost like a fever that broke, and then he was able to not be so incessantly needy for more and more and more sex.
She is special.
She is special. She's good at fashion. She's great at her job, and she's really good at sex.
Yeah, and she is delightful. Everyone loves her. She's charming and funny. And there's a whole pack of the city's most desirable alphas in love with her.
So this,
Well, you got it going on.
yeah, Lola, good for you, girl. This whole scene with the Omega being in heat, they go to a different house. It's their upstate house, and
Safe
there's
house.
a nest that they've created, and it's just like a room with mattresses and pillows. And they're all just in there, all like sweaty and having sex with each other. And at one point, it gets to this configuration, and I was wondering if there's a name for it because it was a man in a man, and then Lola, and then man, and they're all having
Plugged
some
together.
Yeah, they're all connected. And she even described it in like a memory a few chapters later as she was the middle of the sex sandwich, which I thought was a pretty good way to think about it. But is there a name for that? I don't know.
Surely there is.
Probably.
100% someone has a name
But
out there.
it started with her and two guys, one on either side, and then two other guys came and like bookended them.
Like Voltron, they formed. All the pieces just clicking
And her
on.
eyes just started glowing red.
Yeah.
Oh.
And there was, in this world, apparently it is more common for the male to be the alpha and for a female to be the omega. And so when she's first hooking up with Rake, she's kind of curious how it works that he's a male omega and that all his alphas are male. And that because there's a phenomena in paranormal romance, if you do not read it, is often if there's an alpha, they have a knot and like locks inside during this kind of breeding time. And it is, I don't know, like the super bond, I guess, between the two. And so it happens in like werewolf romances too. And there's lots of animal romance, shifter romances. I saw a couple recently. I was like, I would have never even considered that.
Are you
as
talking
in
about the raccoon?
there? Yeah, it was. You know what? I'm fascinated. So I'll have to. Perhaps
Everybody
I don't
has
know.
their own unique
Yeah,
brand of
I
things
just
that they like.
I just had never even considered that there would be a shifter raccoon.
Raccoon shifter.
Holly said, but they do have clever little hands. So hey, so anyways, nodding is typical, and so Lola's asking Rake like, how does this work? And he said, oh, with the female, it's kind of like there's a lock. It's almost like the magical Kegel that they do to the male alpha, and so she's trying to do it to Rake. So maybe also she's bringing this power into
Yeah,
the
because
pack.
they didn't have any other females.
Pussy power.
So I really liked Lola in this book. She was a strong character. She had a lot of trauma, but that didn't define her, and she was working so hard to overcome it. And when she would come out of her shell, she could totally dish out what, especially Rake, but some of these characters were giving to her. So she was a great character. And then her best friend, Baby, didn't show up too much. She was all right. I didn't find her to be a great character, but I didn't really have any problems with her. But other than those two, there were only 3 women at all mentioned in the book, and I didn't like them at all. I didn't feel like it was a good portrayal of women. I mean, they were just like all bitches.
They were like from the 80s
Yes.
soap
Oh my
opera
God.
dynasty, like the kind of
Yes, or like
rich bitch
80
vibes.
rom-coms where it's just like this caricature of traits of women. One of them was a female alpha, which is quite rare, and all she was doing was trying to mess with Lola and make her uncomfortable and corner her and put her scent on her.
And then like undermine the magazine and
Yeah, then another one, she was like one of the bosses, editors at the magazine, and she's just trying to start a new magazine and steal all the talent, and just very underhanded. And then the final character was Matthew's girlfriend, and he ended up breaking up with her because she was just like a total wet blanket. And she was put in a position to fail, and she failed. And it just didn't feel like this uplifting messaging on women. And I just didn't really go for that. I wish maybe
they weren't
there
your
had-
favorites.
they just weren't my favorites. Not only those women, but then it made me think in this whole universe, and to a certain extent, this is my only exposure to Kathryn Moon so far, just kind of feeling like, okay, that's not a great look for women, other than Lola, who, like I said, is a good character. So that part was a little bit, there was like a dichotomy there between main character and side characters.
I wonder if it is, we'll have to read more of her books because I really like her writing. But in this world, it is this hierarchical structure. And at the beginning of the book, Lola is she got messed with. And these predatory alphas took advantage of the fact that she wanted to become an omega. So she was hoping that her heat would break, and they manipulated her and then abused her. Like, it wasn't a relationship. They just had her like mind fucked, basically. But she had been kind of thought that she deserved this bad treatment because she had been like a alpha groupie, like kind of chasing them, because she wanted this to happen. So she would kind of she was like boy crazy, alpha crazy, she'd chase them around and kind of sounded like a groupie a little bit. So I wonder if it's kind of like women are competition because the alphas are primarily males and women who are not omegas are like hoping, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
I'm reading a lot of patriarchal society into this.
I think so. This is definitely a patriarchal society. Luckily, these alphas that we are introduced to in this book are
The best.
consummate gentlemen.
Are the
I don't think
consummate
that's a word.
gentlemen. Well, we will give Lola a break because she had, maybe her view of women was colored. I don't know. But in any case, it was really fun to read. Oh, and the last bit about the omegaverse versus the reverse harem is, of course, the paranormal difference. But with the omegaverse, the pack is kind of a unit, and then the omega is this character that is pulled into it, and then that person, their interaction with it, and it's, as I said, this biological drive of like breeding and mating. And then the reverse harem is usually like one main female character, reverse being because traditionally men have had the pleasure of harem for millennia, and so the reverse harem is the woman getting her own bouquet. Yeah, she got a full deck. So it is her often coming across a group of guy friends, maybe, or it's very often a motorcycle pack too. Just that's a frequent thing, or kind of like crime world or ne'er-do-well types who really have a heart of gold. But she'll start to establish romances with them, and they're kind of individual ties with each person. And so there's a lot of interpersonal conflict of like, how do we make it all work? Or, how do we overcome whatever complications we have about sharing this person? So it's 2 different universes, basically. And definitely, I was very confused. It is not a reverse harem. No one get mad at me. I've learned.
Great. That's a good growth moment.
Good. Annie's growth arc. So what's the next book in this series? I'm going to read the next one because I'm like, what's going to happen with the bad guy
The
and
next
with
one
her
is
pack?
Lola and the Millionaires Part 2.
Easy enough to find.
Yes.
And awesome. So thank you, Kathryn Moon, for writing this book. I love her writing.
Yeah, I liked it.
I liked it too. Definitely read it if you want fun romance, but avoid it if you have read your trigger warnings. That's all. But it's great writing. And then up next, we're taking a total turn and we are going to a ranch.
Yes, we are reading A Thorn in the Saddle by Rebecca Weatherspoon.
Yeah, cowboys.
Cowboy.
Woo.
So if you want to read that, you can join us or just listen to us talk about it.
Wax poetic about men on stallions.
About spurs.
Spurs, yeah,
And chaps.
whips. And chaps, dusty chaps. Awesome.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us.
Bye. Yeah, thanks for joining us. And we're really glad that you all are here because we love romance novels and we imagine you do too. All right. Happily ever after.
Goodbye.